folks. This is part 3 of our series. I'm Pastor Steve Herring, Stated Supply at the Pine Tops Presbyterian Church, Cobb Memorial Presbyterian Church, and the Nahala Presbyterian Churches. We're in Edgecombe County and in Halifax County, North Carolina. It's a rainy Wednesday night, November the 11th, and we're doing a series on the history of the scriptures and trying to give you some basic background as to where the scriptures came from, what they are, and how we use them. Now, what we've covered in part 1 was the introduction to the Hebrew scriptures. Part 2 moved into the Greek scriptures, the Septuagint and the Greek New Testament. And now we're going to pick this up as our faith, the Christian faith, gradually pushed westward in the Roman Empire. By the 4th century after Jesus was born and did his ministry, was crucified and risen from the dead. By the 4th century, the faith steadily spread westward from the eastern part of the empire. And as it did, it entered areas where people used the language of Rome. Greek is the language of Greece that was propagated by the Greek civilization that spread under the influence of Alexander the Great. And Alexander went east. So the Greeks and the Greek influence pushed from Greece eastward. The Etruscan and Roman influence would push eastward as well, but it would also push westward, all the way west as far as that great little island called Britannia, just outside the Mediterranean basin. Now, the believers in the early church, some of them were Jews, some of them were previously pagans that became believers in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Many of these were Latin speakers. They were Romans. They thought in Latin, they read Latin, they wrote Latin. Latin was their language. They needed to have the scriptures in their language. In the early 400s, early 5th century of the Common Era, Saint Jerome translated the scriptures into Latin. Now, there were earlier Old Latin translations that were available, but Jerome carefully, systematically translated the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. Jerome was a very interesting figure. He lived in Palestine. He lived, I believe, not far from Bethlehem in a cave. And he was well schooled in both Greek and in Hebrew. So he translated the Hebrew into this Latin Vulgate. And he also translated the New Testament, the Greek New Testament, into Latin. Okay, Biblia Sacra Vulgata. I'm going to bring this up so you can see it, what it says there. Biblia Sacra Vulgata. Biblia means book, Sacra means holy, Vulgata means common language. This is the holy book in the common language, the Latin Vulgate. Happens to be one of the very best translations that there is. Jerome was amazing. He just did a splendid job of translating it into a very simple but eloquent Latin prose. And his translation was powerfully influential. For about 1,000 years, it was basically about the only translation that we had. Now, what ended up happening, we have to realize that languages change over time. And as time progressed, the Latin language gradually merged with other dialects that were being spoken in various places. And as it merged, languages changed. So in the Roman province of Hispania, the Latin language gradually changed into Castilian Spanish. It changed in Britannia into English by merging with West Saxon and Dano-Saxon and East Saxon dialects. Mixed in with some Latin, turned into English. In Gallia, the language changed into French. Even in Italy itself, Latin evolved into Italian. And what this meant was that common believers were unable to read the scriptures in a language that they could actually read. And so there came to be a process in which different people in different places would begin to translate the scriptures into the local dialect that they spoke. Now, in England, the first translator was in the 1300s. We have some scriptures in Anglo-Saxon from the 10th century, 11th century. We do have some scriptures in Anglo-Saxon, and that is those would be the very first English scriptures, but it was not systematically done. We do not have a complete Anglo-Saxon Bible. The first really complete set of scriptures that we've got would be the work of Wycliffe, who translated into what was then Middle English. He translated the scriptures, and he only translated the Vulgate. He just translated the Latin directly into English. Now, coming up into the 1500s, by the 1500s, the Roman Church had become very corrupt, and there was a lot of friction as the Roman Catholic popes were essentially world leaders, superpower leaders at that time, and this was not popular at all in Britain, in England. So under King Henry, mid-1500s, there was a break. There was an amazing break with Rome. It really had to do with Henry's desire to divorce his wife. And Henry was married to Catherine of Aragon. Aragon is in Spain. That marriage had been arranged by the Pope, who wanted the kingdom of Spain and the kingdom of England to quit fighting with one another, so that the influence of the Roman Church could spread to this newly discovered New World, which the late 1400s had been discovered. And so he wanted there to be peace between England and Spain. So he married the King of England to the Princess of Spain. But Henry didn't like it. He wanted out. He requested a divorce. And that divorce was not granted to him. And so Henry had no choice but to, in his own idea, his own view of things, he broke away from the Roman Church. He simply told the Roman Pope to go whatever he told him. He didn't follow the Pope's instructions. He divorced his wife, and he also set up an English church, not the Roman Catholic Church, but the Church of England. And doing that had an enormous impact. One of the impacts was, if there was going to be a Church of England, there would be English scriptures. For why should we be part of a Church of England? We read English, we speak English, we think in English, we are English people, and why would we use scriptures that are written in the language of Rome? So we would translate those scriptures into English. Now, Wycliffe had begun the process in the 1300s, so they already had available English scriptures. And other scholars would set to work initially translating the Vulgate, and then as this was the Renaissance and there was all this popular learning and education, they would take and translate the Greek scriptures into English. Now, the whole thing that Henry set going set the stage for an English civil war, because there were Roman Catholic people in England who wanted to stay Roman Catholic and did not want to break away from the papacy. They didn't want to break away from Rome. They wanted to stay Catholic. And there were other English who were more Puritans. They wanted a Presbyterian style, not only of worship, but of government. They wanted to do away with the whole idea of monarchy and go to a more democratic Presbyterian style of government, where all the people could vote and select a parliament and let that parliament rule the British people. And this set off a civil war. And this English civil war was intensely religious in its underpinnings. Okay, it was basically Church of England against Roman Catholic against Presbyterian. Presbyterians being Scots. So there were all these parties fighting with one another, and finally, when the English monarchy was restored, a king of England whose name was James, King James, as the kingdom gradually settled down into stability and prosperity and peace, as the exploration of the New World brought in all this money into Europe, and the various parties that had been at war with one another realized that maybe they didn't need to keep fighting with each other, because the New World, after all, was huge, and the Spanish could have their part, the English could have their part, the French could have their part, and there was no reason to keep killing each other, and the civil wars settled down. King James basically, in this period of stability, prosperity, and peace, King James says, okay, you can translate and you can print these scriptures. And so he actually got a committee of scholars together, and this committee of scholars would translate the scriptures, working with the Hebrew, working with the Greek, primarily actually translating the Vulgate. They would create a set of scriptures, and King James would authorize that these would be the scriptures that would be printed by the printers of the kingdom. and that came to be known as the King James Bible. The King James Bible. And that date was 1611. Now, the English were not finished having civil wars. The English were not, the Civil Wars, I think, came a little bit later, and the Restoration a good bit later, but suffice it to say that along in this process of the settlement of the New World, the colonization of the New World, King James authorized that there would be English scriptures that would be printed, and that came to be called the King James Bible. So in our history, the history of these Presbyterian churches and these Presbyterian people, when our ancestors came to this new world, they brought the King James Bible with them. And that King James Bible was the foundational scripture for the English settlers, colonists, colonialists who came to this land in the early 1600s through the mid 1600s through the late 1600s and into the 1700s. That was the scripture they used. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this section up, and I've got one more section that we're going to do after this one. That's going to be part 4. And part 4 is going to deal a little bit with how we use the scriptures today.